So, whether you're buying a home, selling one, or even refinancing, you're going to run into something called an appraisal. It's this one critical step that can make or break a deal, and honestly, a lot of people aren't totally sure what it is. Let's pull back the curtain and demystify this whole process, shall we?
Come on, we've all done it, right? You pop your address into one of those online websites and get that instant magic number. It's fun. But what is your property really worth in the real world? Well, a formal appraisal is designed to answer that exact question, to get past the algorithms and find a home's true, defensible market value.
So, here's the game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with the absolute basics. What even is an appraisal? Then we'll dive into why it's so important. After that, we'll get a behind-the-scenes look at the actual process, unpack the key factors that drive the final number, and wrap up with the practical stuff, like costs and what to do if you hit a snag.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1. Before we get into all the nitty-gritty details, we really need to have a solid handle on what an appraisal actually is, and just as importantly, what it isn't.
Right off the bat, this is not just someone's opinion or a ballpark figure. An appraisal is a formal professional evaluation. Think of it as a financial health check for a house, conducted by a licensed, totally impartial expert. The whole point is that it's objective and documented, so it can stand up to some serious scrutiny.
And that brings us to a super important distinction. You know those online estimates? They're just algorithms using public data. They have no idea you just spent a fortune renovating your kitchen or that the house next door is a total teardown. A professional appraisal, on the other hand, involves an actual human being walking through the property. That on-site inspection and expert analysis is what makes it so much more reliable and even legally defensible.
Okay, so we know what it is, but why is it basically a requirement for any major real estate transaction? Well, it all comes down to one word: protection. It's there to protect every single person who has a stake in the deal.
The most obvious one is the lender, right? They're about to loan out a huge amount of money, so they need to be sure the property is actually worth it. But for you as a buyer, it's your safety net to make sure you don't overpay. For sellers, it gives you hard data to back up your asking price. And they're absolutely essential in legal situations too, like settling an estate or divorce, to make sure everything is fair. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. Buying and selling a home is incredibly emotional. A buyer might fall in love with the backyard, and a seller has memories in every room. The appraiser's job is to step in as the neutral, objective third party and say, okay, emotions aside, here is what the data says this property is worth.
Now for the really interesting part. Let's actually peek behind the curtain. How does an appraiser take a house and turn it into that final, all-important number in their report?
You know, it might seem complicated, but it really breaks down into three main stages. First, the appraiser physically visits the property to do a thorough inspection. Second, they go back to their office and do a ton of research, looking at what similar homes have sold for. And third, they take all that information and compile it into one comprehensive final report.
During that on-site visit, the appraiser is basically a detective. They're looking at everything. We're talking about the age and condition of the roof, the efficiency of the layout, the quality of the heating and cooling systems, and of course, getting precise measurements of the square footage. No detail is too small.
So that brings us to the million-dollar question, sometimes literally. Out of everything they look at, what are the biggest factors that really drive that final value up or down?
You've heard it a million times, and you're going to hear it again because it's just that true. Location, location, location. Things like the quality of the local schools, proximity to parks and shopping, and access to jobs, they all have a massive impact. A smaller house in a great neighborhood can easily be worth more than a bigger house somewhere less desirable.
Next up, and this one is huge, is the physical condition of the property. This is where your maintenance or lack of it really comes into play. Things that need fixing, like peeling paint or an ancient water heater, are going to drag the value down. But recent upgrades, like a new kitchen or energy-efficient windows, can give it a really nice boost.
And here's how some of those specific features translate into actual value adjustments. For example, if you have a nicely finished basement or an extra bathroom, that's going to add value, no question. On the flip side, a kitchen that hasn't been touched since the 80s or obvious signs of deferred maintenance, well, those are going to subtract from the final number.
So if we were to stack all these factors up, what really matters most? Well, as you can see, location and condition are the absolute heavyweights. Together, they account for the lion's share of a property's value. After that, you've got the home size and its specific features. And finally, the overall state of the real estate market at that moment.
All right, last section. Let's talk about the practical side of all this. What does an appraisal cost? And what happens if there's a problem? What if that number isn't what you expected? For a pretty standard single-family home, you can usually expect to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 to $800. Now, of course, if you have a really large or complex property, that fee is going to be higher. And just so you know, this cost is almost always paid for by the buyer.
But here it is, the question that keeps buyers and sellers awake at night. You've found the perfect house, you've agreed on a price, everything is moving along smoothly, and then the call comes. The appraisal came in low. What happens now?
Okay, first things first, take a deep breath. A low appraisal does not automatically kill the deal. It just means it's time for a new conversation. For the buyer, the options are to try and negotiate a lower price, bring extra cash to the closing table to cover that gap, or even challenge the appraisal if they think there was an error. The seller can either accept a lower price, say no thanks and walk away, or provide new information to the appraiser to ask for a reconsideration. It just opens up a new set of choices.
So, while the whole thing can feel a little complex and maybe even a bit stressful, at the end of the day, the appraisal is simply the most reliable tool we have to answer that fundamental question of value. It gives clarity and protection to everyone involved, and it makes sure these huge financial decisions are based on solid facts, not just feelings. So, are you ready to find out what your assets are really worth?